Alien is a film that has intrigued and terrified me in equal measure since I was a boy. As a kid, I was shaken by Ridley Scott's use of violence, which appeared ostensibly real to my young eyes. Despite being a child of cinema, well versed in the many depictions of 80s sci-fi bloodshed, the events that befell the Nostromo and its crew were not just frightful, but tangible.
What? And end up like the others? Oh, no, you're out of your mind.
As I've grown, my tolerance for gore has also developed, and yet the depictions of violence in Alien still shock me today, but not quite for the same reasons. I wrote this essay as an introduction to the key themes in Alien that, in my opinion, inform why it still has power over us today.
"38-year-old American standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind."
The moon landing was broadcast worldwide with a truly resounding message. Mankind's quest to conquer the cosmos had begun. With the common man's enthusiasm for space exploration expanding, Hollywood's gaze faltered from the dusty vistas of 1,000 westerns and instead turned upwards. Space was to be cinema's next frontier, and with unexpectedly terrifying results. Since Méliès's A Trip to the Moon, space as portrayed on film has largely inspired awe, resulting in a myriad of fantastical images and landscapes being set to screen. The forever expanding cosmos has and continues to present storytellers with a wealth of imaginative locations for the great fantasies of old to take place. This is no better demonstrated than with George Lucas's mega franchise Star Wars. Star Wars boasted a classic narrative of an innocent good locked in battle with an impossible evil, which substituted the stock folklore phrase of
"Once upon a time, in a faraway land,"
with "a long, long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away." Though Star Wars represented a whimsical outlook for the life of a space adventurer, it inadvertently paved the way for an altogether more horrifying exploration of the genre. On the 25th of May 1979, a queue populated by anxious science fiction fans formed outside Hollywood's Egyptian theatre. The primed audience hurried into their cinema seats, unaware of the vital role they were to play in a key point in cinematic history. For many, their memory of the film would be cut short by a dash towards the nearest lavatory. A combined experience of terror and nausea would be all they had to describe what little of the film they had witnessed, a modestly budgeted studio film called Alien. Upon release, Alien presented audiences with something seldom seen in science fiction cinema, and it shook them to their core. The combination of Scott's taut focus on psychological and claustrophobic terror and an unflinching presentation of gore helped make it the box office hit it was, terrorizing audiences to the tune of $100 million revenue worldwide, which was a large number for 1979. But why does Alien continue to resonate with modern audiences of horror, spawning 5 direct sequels and prequels and countless spin-offs across multiple mediums? All this despite forever changing social attitudes. Why has Alien lasted in a constantly shifting genre that has seen so many of its like fade to obscurity? The horror genre provides a prime example of just how a genre can evolve to meet the changing social attitudes of its audience, since its fundamental purpose is to exploit society's fears in order to evoke a raw emotional response. That response being fear. As an example, from the 1950s through to the 1980s, horror evolved from the science fiction B-movies such as It Came From Outer Space and The Amazing Colossal Man, to slasher horrors such as Psycho and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This line of evolution in the genre mirrors the changing concerns of its audience, from their fears of communism during the McCarthy era and of nuclear apocalypse in the wake of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, to an altogether more grounded fear, that is, the fear of one's neighbour, largely due to the apprehension, trial and incarceration of the now infamous Wisconsin serial killer Ed Gein in 1957. America no longer feared communism, the extraterrestrial, or nuclear advancement, but rather the millions of quiet men that lived next door. As a result, the B pictures of the 1950s took a backseat to the rise of the slasher horror. Much like every horror film, Alien has achieved longevity through exploitation of personal fear, but the specifics of what those fears are have become a talking point for academics in film literature. Discussion of the topic can be found in highly recommendable texts such as Alien Woman, The Making of Lieutenant Ellen Ripley, On Film, and From Alien to the Matrix, Reading the Science Fiction Film. Although the writers often conflict as to why Alien still terrifies audiences, there is a shared opinion that though the film is violent, there is something more cerebral at work, and to suggest that Alien is simply a gore-orientated exploitation flick in the same vein as those typical of the torture porn and slasher genre, undercuts its success as a psychological horror. However, in many ways, Alien does fit several of the defining parameters of the slasher genre. It concerns the plight of an unlucky and unsuspecting few who find themselves at the mercy of an unknowable and mysterious evil. Established rules are broken. Here, teen sex and drug taking is substituted with a monstrous male rape and the breaking of safety protocols.
You also forgot the Science Division's basic quarantine law.
As a result of their deviances, the film's characters must pay the ultimate price. As the Nostromo's crew are picked off in a variety of suspenseful set pieces, their numbers dwindle until all but one final girl remains to face and ultimately overcome this impossible evil. It is no surprise to learn then that Tobe Hooper's seminal slasher, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was an inspiration for Ridley Scott. According to writer Dan O'Bannon, while deep in pre-production on Alien, Scott is quoted as saying, "Alien has got to be like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but better." Though it's clear Scott's film shares tropes with the genre, there are unavoidable differences that set it apart from contemporary slashers. With its extraterrestrial setting, otherworldly spacecrafts, and a maze of industrial corridors, Alien offers audiences little to recognise as home. However, the greatest difference of all is perhaps in the filmmaker's choice of villain, the titular alien. Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre present a series of very real, flesh and blood, human villains. The evil they present sleeps but one door down or a car ride away, waiting like a lion to prey on those who aim to pass through their domain. They are tangible, if somewhat exaggerated threats drawn from very real newspaper headlines. Though the alien is capable of resembling a human shape within certain framing, lighting and posture conditions, it remains unmistakably foreign. With its many protruding pipes and stretched tendons wrapped up in an athletic exoskeleton, the alien is both machine and living organism. It is a biomechanical monstrosity. When comparing these horror icons, the question arises, what is it about this otherworldly and ultimately unknowable beast that audiences both recognise and fear?
Dan said, somehow the monster has to get on board the ship in a way that'll amaze everybody. And so I woke up in the middle of the night and I said, Dan, I have an idea. And he said, what? And I said, the monster screws one of the people. He says, what? What are you talking about? I said, he jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach. And Dan goes, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Nobody's ever seen anything like that. And we just sat up all night and we wrote, and in 3 weeks, we had I would say, which is 85% of the plot.
Upon reading Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shussett's original script, then hilariously entitled Star Beast, David Giler described the draft as just terrible. Although far more composed in describing his own reaction, Walter Hill similarly recounted in an interview with Film International how he didn't think much of it. However poor their initial reactions were, both of them enthusiastically agreed that it did have this one sensational scene, a scene of such horror that it would continue to resonate with audiences over 30 years later, one worth hanging an entire film franchise on. I refer, of course, to the monstrous birth of Cain's son, the chestburster scene. When the alien emerged with an explosion of viscera from a cavity in John Hurt's chest, audiences were sent reeling in shock and horror. The reaction thrust the film into the annals of horror history. Talking of the film's earliest previews, Terry Rawlings, Alien's editor, described his theatrical experience as following.
It was the most incredible preview I've ever been in. I mean, people were screaming and running out of the theatre. People are being sick everywhere and it's in a state. We thought, this is great.
In Alien's extensive making-of documentary, both David Giler and Alan Ladd Jr. recall how an usher fainted during this very preview. The film not only had a profound effect on cinema-going audiences, but also with the religiously inclined, as an alien fossil theatre prop was destroyed by those who claimed it was the work of the Antichrist. It is no wonder the chestburster scene had such a resonance, as it stands as the backbone of Scott's film, encompassing a number of subtextual themes, the most prominent being the then taboo subject of male rape, a loss of sexual identity, and perhaps most obviously, the horrors of childbirth. Understanding how these themes were utilised by the writers and filmmakers is key to understanding Alien's lasting power. The designs of the derelict spacecraft, the creation of the creature itself, and even the very first scenes are constructed to subconsciously prepare us for the horrors to come. But the chestburster scene is but one of 3 birthing scenes in Alien's runtime. Ridley Scott presents the first birthing scene within Alien's opening minutes. As the camera tracks through dark corridors towards a white room awash with light, we are eventually introduced to the ensemble as they wake from deep cryosleep. The music swells as the semi-naked crew slowly blink into consciousness, gently brought to life by one of the film's many parental figures' mother, the Nostromo's master computer. All of this takes place in a sterilised white room with a strong resemblance to a hospital surgery. What Scott presents here is an idealised fantasy of birth, a harsh and jarring juxtaposition to the monstrously violent birth yet to come. Stephen Mulhall too ponders the theme of birth or rebirth in Alien's opening scene. He says, on another level, the crew appears to be undergoing a kind of rebirth. They emerge like seeds from a pod, as if extruded by the ship itself, almost naked as the day they were born. Although Mulhall describes the hibernation pods as being coffin-shaped, as a foreshadowing of the crew's later fate, Ros Kavanagh describes them as crucially egg-like. In her study of the Alien franchise, she compares the cryosleep rebirth of the Nostromo crew directly to the Alien life cycle. She states, the pods from which the characters emerge are spherical with transparent lids. In a film in which eggs are to have a crucial role, it is important that there be these good eggs in the beginning to counterpose the evil eggs which we are going to see in due course. The Nostromo's hibernation pods and the eggs which host the facehugger are also aesthetically connected. Both are introduced as pods shrouded in darkness that are revealed as transparent once bathed in light. Ultimately, the cryo chamber scene provides audiences a false sense of security once the evil eggs are introduced. Our expectations of a gentler series of events are established in the opening scene, only to be challenged by the alien egg and the viscera that follows its introduction. This juxtaposition confronts our fantasies of the delivery of life with something horrifying and yet somehow familiar. Though the alien creature that eventually terrorises the crew is indeed a biomechanical nightmare, the imagery associated with its birth is decidedly organic and recognisably sexual. The industrial corridors and automated hallways that map the Nostromo are replaced by the seemingly organic vaginal sculpted walkways of the downed derelict craft Kane, Lambert and Dallas explore. In their book Alien Woman, Gallardo C. and Smith describe Kane's fate as the result of his investigation of the interior of the monstrous female body. Furthermore, they depict the alien eggs as uterus-shaped with a distinctly vaginal opening, strengthening the connection between this alien being and the natural female reproductive system. But ultimately, the violent, thrashing and painful eruption of the alien through Kane's chest bears more resemblance to the reality of human birth in comparison to the painless, gentle and automated waking of the Nostromo crew into consciousness. This assault on our fantasies is perhaps best demonstrated by Stephen Mulhall. We are being given a picture of human origination that represses its creatureliness, that represents parturition as an automated function of technology rather than of flesh, emerging noisily and painfully from flesh, as essentially devoid of blood, trauma, and sexuality. The birthing of Cain's son scares us because it serves as a grim reminder of the sometimes fatal reality of childbirth. It authentically captures the horror of birth, but for a glaringly unavoidable discrepancy with terrifying implications. The mother, in this scenario, is male. Since Alien presents us with an unnatural birthing vessel in Cain, we can begin to approach the implications that has on themes such as sexual identity, who we desire, and gender. The most immediate implication of showing a male in a traditionally female parental role, as mother, is that Alien depicts the creature as having a complete disregard for gender as a primarily masculine safety net. This process of reproduction ultimately feminizes the human race, treating all potential hosts as gender equals. The creature's method of sexual intercourse, smothering its victims and orally penetrating them with a large phallus from which it deposits the parasite, assaults our individuality. It is a monstrous rape from a being that has no concern for our gender-informed social constructs. On addressing what implications the alien life cycle has on sexual identity, Mulhall states, "For the human race to be feminized is thus for human individuality as such to be threatened, as if the alien's monstrosity declares that something about the acknowledgement of individuality, in particular acknowledging the relation of individuality to sexual difference, sticks in our throats and makes us gag." Gallardo C. and Smith also correspond with this reading of the text in a passage that references Amy Taubman's deconstruction of the alien creature. The alien species disregards a sexual difference that is so essential to our definition of what it is to be human. The male body is repositioned to correspond to the female body. The male mouth becomes the vagina, his chest the womb. The dichotomy male-female is broken down as all humanity is female, a womb, in the face of the alien. Themes of sexual identity can be further observed in H.R. Giger's creature design. The imagery he associates with the beast referenced, amongst other nightmarish appendages, both male and female genitalia, rendering it hermaphroditic by human standards. This was entirely intentional, as Ridley Scott describes the importance of the alien creature's sexual presence in the following. "Originally I wanted a very feminine creature, to have a creature that was at once desirable and lethal. That was exciting. It was the eroticism in Giger's work that had struck me immediately. Everything merged. It's a very organic painting. All the while there were practical problems, and by general agreement we had to give up on the original idea. The alien was transformed into a man with a feminine shape, a hermaphrodite. Though the creature displays both the male and female genitalia of its host, its femininity is rarely referenced in a way to incite fear or disgust. Its terror is still derived from its masculinity, primarily the ability to penetrate and possibly impregnate. From birth, the creature is shown to burst violently through the chest of Cain, declaring its dominance by standing with the appearance of an erect penis covered in blood and tissue. In adulthood, the creature develops a phallus-shaped head, which conceals a set of inner jaws used to penetrate its victims and kill them. It stands as a challenge to masculinity, proclaiming itself the bigger manhood in the room.
No, don't touch it! Don't touch it!
It is telling that the most immediate reaction to the birth of Cain's son comes from Parker, the film's most stereotypically masculine character. He is adversarial to authority figures, especially when that authority is female, and is the only character in the film who outwardly expresses any kind of sexual desire.
Pound down the stuff like that.
Listen, I'd rather be eating something else, but right now I'm thinking of food.
Upon the death of Cain, while those around him reel in shock and terror, he instead seizes upon the means to attack the creature. It could feminize him, just as it had his crewmate. For a character whose masculinity is key to his identity, he is first to understand these implications. However, Parker's attempt to kill the beast is stifled by the ship's chief science officer, Ash, an android whose relationship with the beast demonstrates the anxieties that arise when faced with a genderless existence.
you like I do.
The theme of android sexuality is common in Ridley Scott's science fiction filmography. His exploration of it can be viewed in Blade Runner, in which the central character, a destructive bounty hunter named Deckard, forces himself on his replicant assistant in a display of his masculinity. But whereas Deckard's actions were originally conceived to counter those of his replicant bounty, the empathetic Roy Batty, Ash's actions provide a mirror to that of the alien's life cycle, and his desire for not only a sexual identity, but for sexual dominance. Ash, after all, is lacking one crucial element of human anatomy, a penis. During the director's commentary, Ridley Scott muses on the motivations and Freudian overtones of Ash's attack on Ripley. He says,
Exactly, I figured robots had to have, if they're really sophisticated, had to occasionally have the urge. So I'd said to Ash, how do you feel about sexual drive? He said, great. So I said, rather than just beating her up, isn't it more interesting that he actually has always wanted to, and here's his opportunity, but he doesn't have that part.
Oh, he doesn't.
And therefore it's a magazine.
Ah.
That part obviously implying his penis. In a deleted scene, two of the Nostromo's female crewmates discuss Ash's possible sexuality. Ripley asks Lambert if she had slept with him, to which no comes the pointed reply. It makes sense then that this repressed and gender-confused android would hold affinity for the film's central villain. Ash's admiration of the alien and the efficiency of its life cycle is evident throughout. He breaks safety protocol in order to ensure the beast's maturation, fawns over the facehugger during his endless examinations, and is quoted as describing the eventual beast as a perfect organism.
Still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you? Perfect organism.
You admire it.
I admire its purity. A survivor. Unclouded by conscience, remorse, or delusions of morality.
At times his regard for the being verges on attraction, as observed in the character's final moments. His tone when speaking to Ripley is almost flirtatious.
I can't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
This attraction raises the question as to whether Ash possibly identifies with the creature's destructive disregard of sexual identity and gender, since it's an aspect of the human experience he is ultimately lacking. His admiration of the beast and frustration towards his own lack of sexual identity culminates with his attack and attempted rape of Ripley. In the scene, Ash is shown to brutally attack Ripley before choking her. His actions mirror that of the alien's facehugger, as he substitutes that creature's phallic egg depositor with a rolled up pornographic magazine, which he then forces into Ripley's mouth and throat. The seedy material plays a dual role in the attack, acting as a surrogate penis for the android, but also as an example of Ripley's sexuality, with which Ash attempts to kill her with. Like the facehugger he so admired, Ash inserts his masculine dominance over Ripley, the imagery suggesting he is reaching climax. However, unlike the facehugger, he is without seed to impregnate Ripley. Ash is impotent. Scott rationalizes Ash's attempted rape of Ripley as an inability to process human emotion, an unfortunate result of his lack of sexuality. He states, this perfect machine starts to have feelings when faced with the behaviour of humans. It starts to be interested in the women and to have desires that cannot be expressed. Behind the assault on Ripley is an attempt to solve these tensions, a sort of rape. Ultimately, Ash serves as a monstrous example of the emasculated male in the face of gender and sexual erasure. Manufactured with human emotion, Ash is driven to malfunction, or rape, by his failed attempt to understand or express his own sexuality. As a result, this perfect machine, as described by Scott, turns to the perfect organism for the answer to his questions. His actions serve as a terrifying reminder of the potential destructiveness of men in a world in which their role as a sexual authority diminishes. Set against the vastness of space, Alien not only highlights the existential horror that is our insignificance within an uncaring universe, but also within our own social constructs here on Earth. It asks, who are we when stripped of our sexuality and of the stock we have placed in crafting our personalities around it? But for all its cosmic horror, Alien ends with a moment of triumph and relief. In Alien's final scenes, we are presented with the image of a woman, Ripley, in a vulnerable and near-naked state, her femininity revealed from beneath her unisex worker's uniform. A femininity the alien desires to strip her of, just as she had shed her uniform. After the presentation of her womanhood, Ripley is shown to overcome the beast by blasting it back into the cold reaches of this vast and uncaring space. In doing so, she has reclaimed her sexual identity, allowing the audience to safely celebrate their own. And so, Alien will continue to resonate with audiences because it affects people on multiple personal levels with personal and psychological themes untethered by social change. It allows us to glimpse a fantasy of painless automated childbirth before confronting us with the painful and bloody reality. Alien weaponizes our fears of sexuality, gender, and the fantasies of life, and forces us to imagine ourselves in a way both horrifying, but perhaps with a shed of truth about it. That beneath all of our social dressings, we are inconsequential, faceless vessels in the dark, waiting to violently hatch before death. Hi everyone, thanks for watching the video. It was quite an effort to make, but I'm glad it's finally out there. I'm very interested to hear what you lovely folks have to say about it, so agree or disagree, please sign off on the comments below. I love reading whatever you have to say. If you like this content and would like to see more of it, I would ask you to please consider donating to my Patreon page, which should be found on a link that's on the page right now. There you'll get early access to all future episodes as well as exclusive content, which is currently in the works. But honestly, I cannot thank you folks enough for watching. But until next time, this is Gareth Green, signing off.